this Driving Toward Equity video, we'll explain what racial equity tools are, explore examples of municipalities using tools, examine barriers and ways around them, and finally, list key components for a toolkit to work effectively.
Racial equity tools are designed to explicitly integrate equity into decisions, including policies, practices, programs, and budgets. Use of a racial equity tool will help to develop strategies and actions that reduce racial inequities and improve success for all groups.
Racial equity tool is ultimately a simple set of questions. 1, what's your proposal? What is the policy, program, practice, or budget decision under consideration? What are the desired results and outcomes?
Data. What's the data, both at the community level and for the specific program or policy under consideration? What does the data tell us?
Community engagement. How have communities been engaged? Are there opportunities to expand engagement?
Analysis and strategies. You need to think about who will benefit from or be burdened by a given decision. What are your strategies for actually advancing racial equity and possibly addressing unintended consequences?
Implementation. What's your plan for implementation? Have you secured the correct decision makers? Do you have the financial resources you need? Do you have the people you need to move forward?
Accountability and communication. How will you ensure accountability? That means tracking results so that if you're not getting the results you want, you might need to make some modifications. How are you communicating a message that advances racial equity?
Now that we've learned a little about the general contours of a racial equity tool, we'll hear from 2 leaders that are using the tools in their municipalities. First, Mateus Valenzuela, Director of the Office of Equity and Social Justice in King County, Washington, and then Jordan Bingham, co-leader of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative in Madison, Wisconsin.
We had been looking at the issue of equity and social justice in terms of race, low-income communities, limited English proficient communities, and seeing that the gaps and inequities were even larger than in other parts of the nation. In 2008, we passed a county-wide strategic plan which now incorporates the work that all county agencies do, including the separate elected officials. With our new and now current executive, Dow Constantine, it's moved beyond an initiative to now really being integrated into the work that we do as a county. And I've been either leading or co-leading the work for the majority of that time. We have a team of leaders within the county, within different divisions, departments, and agencies, who are in charge of leading the work to make sure that we use an equity lens and some of the tools in our policies and decision-making, our organizational practices, and also how we work with the community. It's a process of continuous improvement. We have many different political leanings, but we have the main equity impact review tool. We have integrated equity into the work we do with budget. So our budget office has developed questions that all departments need to ask regarding both each decision that they're making in terms of either a budget enhancement or a budget cut, and they have to actually make a case of how that is going to be a pro-equity decision, meaning who's being affected, communities of color, limited English proficient populations, and low-income communities, and are they benefiting? And if they actually aren't benefiting, what are we doing, or what is that particular division, department, or program doing to mitigate the effects of that? We started off as interdepartmental, meaning it's just the executive branch, and now it's actually inter-branch. So meaning that it covers all elected officials. It includes the courts, it includes prosecuting attorney's office, sheriff, elections, the assessor. They're all part of our inter-branch team. The way we've been looking at it is we're trying to create a county where everybody has the opportunity to thrive. If we're able to create the conditions where everybody can thrive, then everybody benefits.
When we talk about the health of people and communities, we know that factors like where we live, work, learn, and play really matter to our health. One of the sound bites that you hear now, and it's totally true in a lot of our cities, is that your zip code can predict your health more so than even your genetic code. And that means that the factors in our environments, things like the quality of our housing, the types of jobs that people have access to, whether or not healthy food is available and affordable in a community, safety, real and perceived. All of those things can add up to healthy, long living and the absence of disease, or the opposite. So many of those social determinants of health are allocated based on race and have been for a long time. The City of Madison's Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative started in 2013, really in response to a public awareness that even though Madison identifies as one of the most liberal and progressive medium-sized cities in the country, we had some of the worst racialized outcomes that anyone had ever seen, and they were across the board. For a lot of folks who weren't experiencing that day to day in their lives, it was a shock. We realized that local government had a role to play. So how do we make our budgets? How do we spend money? How do we make decisions? And is that informed by any sort of a racial equity analysis? And so we've created a tool to assist with policy and planning decisions that we're just now rolling out in pilot testing. It's called the Racial Equity and Social Justice Analysis Tool. And so it's sort of City of Madison branded. We've actually got two different versions. A comprehensive version, which is really for larger policy decisions, plans that the city is engaging in, like our comprehensive plan or our transportation plan, where you really would have the time on the early end of decisions like that or plans to do a full analysis, ask a really comprehensive set of questions like who would be benefiting from this set of decisions, who would be burdened, what are some of the unintended consequences, who have you involved in the decision, and what needs have they expressed, and how are they going to be addressed, how are we going to be accountable. We've also created a fast track version of the tool, which is just a few of those questions for when we need to make a quick decision, but we still want it to be informed by a racial equity lens. And so we're pilot testing that on a few different areas right now. The other area that we're taking a close look at is city operations. So how are we hiring people? How are people getting promoted? What are the expectations day to day across agencies for really establishing racial equity and social justice as core principles? The initiative is structured to be inclusive across all agencies, and so really trying to create leadership at all levels. Some of the traditional leaders, like our policymakers, our elected officials, are involved, and we think that that's really important, that there's that top level leadership and buy-in, but there's also involvement of staff at all levels. So everything from hourly and part-time and seasonal folks in different departments up through frontline staff like me, making sure all job classes are represented, and also really making sure that there's good representation of people of color in that initiative, because when you talk about racial equity, you got to make sure that, again, folks who are most affected by inequities are at the table and in leadership roles. Because we are a heavily white population in Madison, we also, as white people, understand our role in creating the change that we're looking for. Being able to be a part of a national alliance like this of other jurisdictions doing this work in a learning community is so very valuable, and it also provides a little more street cred to the work, actually being able to bring in someone from another city to be able to talk about the ways that other cities are applying these concepts to their work and prioritizing racial equity in our work and making the case for why. We really do have a role in undoing institutionalized racism and structural racism, and that really does need to become central to all of our work.
Let's discuss some of the barriers to implementation that some jurisdictions have experienced. Lack of support from leadership. The racial equity tool being used in isolation. Lack of support for implementing changes. And perfection being the enemy of the good.
We have some strategies to address these barriers. You need to build the capacity of racial equity teams. Training isn't just about building the skills of individual employees, but it's also to build the skill of teams so that you're creating support for implementation. Systematize use of the racial equity tool. If you've got it built into routine operations such as budget processes or policy briefings, then both management and staff will know that it's a priority. Recognize complexity. There are numerous pros, cons, and trade-offs to be considered in most decisions. When the tool is used on an iterative basis, complex nuances can be addressed over time. Accountability. Build use of the tool into job descriptions and performance agreements.
Now that we've explored the tools, seen some examples of their use, and learned a little about how to address obstacles, let's briefly review what we've seen. First, a racial equity tool proactively seeks to eliminate inequities and advance equity, identifies clear goals and objectives as well as measurable outcomes, and develops mechanisms for successful implementation. Tools have been implemented by school boards, health and utility departments, and have been particularly useful in evaluating municipal budgets. We've also identified a number of things that are necessary for tools to work effectively, including buy-in from the organization and its leaders, routine use of the tool in the organization's ongoing work, data-driven assessment of both current programs and progress, an organizational commitment to both crafting and implementing changes to address racial inequity, and finally, tenacity, an organizational commitment to overcoming obstacles to implement changes. This work is new, exciting, and sometimes difficult. All of our municipalities are different, and we really are making this road by walking it. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity was created to provide support for this work. So if you have an interest in advancing racial equity, we're ready to help.